My husband Martin recently kept a girl who wasn't very well behaved. He spoiled her so much that she forgot her place and even came to confront me. The girl's eyes were bright and vivid. She was even stubborn enough to refuse to call me Mrs. Ning. Miss Sue. In love. The one who isn't loved is the real homewrecker. Heh. Another one of those cliché lines. I curved my eyes slightly, reached out my slender fingers, and yanked off the pearl earring from her ear. A bead of blood instantly welled up on her earlobe. Behind me, Martin Ning appeared, his jaw tightly clenched. Mary merely looked up with reddened eyes. Sir, please don't be angry. Miss Sue probably didn't mean it. Martin simply held my hand and gently blew on it. Nova, does your hand hurt? Mary stared at him in disbelief, large tears rolling down, and I smiled faintly. Chapter 1. Mary was taken away by Martin's secretary. She seemed to have 1,000 things to say. Perhaps she simply couldn't understand why. The man who had treated her gently just yesterday could suddenly turn so different today. Martin's kindness toward me wasn't fake. He noticed a faint mark on my finger and kissed it again and again. Nova, a woman like that isn't worth you lifting a finger, he said, dark eyes showing a hint of disapproval. I looked at Martin, my expression unchanged. His attitude didn't surprise me. We had been childhood sweethearts. He was never a gentle-tempered man, yet he always treated me with tolerance and tenderness. In high-ranking aristocratic families like ours, rotten marriages were everywhere, but I was the one he had begged for. When we married, even my close friend Isabella envied me. After all, once people climb high enough, even basic ethics become blurred. But Martin's feelings for me were genuine. Isabella once said that in big families, loyalty was treated almost like shame. Perhaps money had swollen to such an extent that expecting a man to stay eternally faithful was unrealistic. For many political marriages among powerful families, maintaining superficial harmony was already difficult enough. But Isabella had seen the way Martin served food onto my plate, seen how he couldn't help but smile when mentioning me. He cared about me, but he wasn't 100% mine. At a certain social level, having no flirty playthings around was the real abnormality. The few decoding flowers, those pretty little comforters, Martin occasionally kept were, in Isabella's view, hardly worth mentioning at all. They were simply too common. When filth becomes the norm, purity is what stands out as strange. Chapter 2. Dinner was cooked by Martin. For a man as young and accomplished as he was, the fact that he still willingly cooked was truly rare. Even my always picky mother couldn't help but praise him endlessly. They all seemed to envy me, envy that I could receive most of Martin's love and his complete tolerance. I only had to frown a little, and anything I disliked would disappear from my world because Martin would make it so. He carefully cut my steak into neat pieces. I lowered my eyes and took small bites. His phone kept lighting up. I reached out instinctively, and he thought I was trying to drink from his glass, so he kindly handed it to me. When he saw that I was actually reaching for his phone, he simply smiled, picked up the napkin beside him to wipe his hands, and then handed the phone to me. Wifey, it's rare for you to check up on me, he said, the smile in his eyes unmistakably genuine. Martin never really hid anything from me about keeping those decoding flowers, those gentle, obedient girls men kept for comfort, probably because no one around him handled things better than he did. Toward his wife, he was completely respectful and considerate, always putting me first. Besides, even my own parents each had their own separate worlds outside the marriage. I knew of several illegitimate children already. Since my mother never had a son, she chose one of the better illegitimate boys to inherit the family business. He respected my mother and treated me, his half-sister, with genuine care. In prestigious aristocratic families, loyalty was a joke. No matter how gentle the surface looked, the bones underneath were rotten. I opened his phone and could no longer find Mary. I understood immediately, since she had offended me. Martin would not let her end well. Scrolling further down, there was Vicky, someone who had been around Martin for quite a long time. I had heard of her. She was truly well-behaved, always lowering her eyes. Whenever she saw me, she shrank like a frightened quail. Her posture couldn't be any lower. Martin appreciated her tactfulness. She had decent resources now. I even saw her at a jewelry gala a few days ago. I attended as Mrs. Ning, sitting with Martin on my right. Vicky, wearing a diamond necklace, sat across from us, clearly displaying that necklace to me. I glanced at it twice, and Martin bought it immediately. Vicky thanked me softly, her voice gentle. She was sensible enough not to stay long, and certainly not foolish enough to flaunt herself in front of me. That night, Martin even sensed the faint displeasure in my heart. Leaning close to my ear, he whispered, "You don't like her? Then I'll replace her right away." The affection in his eyes wasn't fake. Anything I disliked, he could discard. I curved my eyes slightly and smiled. "Martin, aren't you being too sensitive?" Ever since childhood, I had always called him by his full name. When we were little, I would sit behind him. The wind puffed up his clothes, and I would rest my cheek against his back. It was the scent of sunlight, the stirring of a young heart, the budding of love. Martin patted my hand. Under the dim lights, his voice was sticky and soft. "Nova, I often think about everything we've been through." I didn't speak, just gazed into the distance in silence. Chapter 3. That night, Martin didn't sleep with me. He said there was something at the company. I neatly straightened his clothes for him and watched him leave. Not long after, Isabella called me. "Hey, I think I just saw your Martin," she said. "He's with my bastard husband. I heard they ordered several girls, but don't worry. Your Martin isn't that wild. He usually keeps it one-on-one." In the dark, I turned on the light. "Then how many male models did you order tonight?" Isabella burst out laughing. "I've invited you before, but you're an odd one, always hating this kind of thing. Never understanding the fun in it. Nova, you need to broaden your horizons. Couples having fun together is the best way. If only one person stays loyal, the heart will get blocked." I didn't respond. Her voice continued. "Nova, I know what it is you want, but you need to understand, once you reach a certain level, women flock around endlessly. You're surrounded by flattery and seduction. Wanting to remain untouched and clean? Too hard." "I'm not untouched," I said softly. Isabella let out a surprised huh, clearly intrigued. "You're keeping someone too? Who? Tell me." I was about to speak when I heard the door open. I curved my eyes and simply hung up the phone. Chapter 4. I stood at the turn of the staircase, looking toward the entrance. John stepped inside with his usual quietness, switching on the light with practiced ease. He took off his shoes and walked into the house. The young man's features were gentle. When he saw me, he gave me a shy smile and gestured softly. I met John on a rainy day, right after I had discovered Martin had someone outside. I had been sitting on the bench at a bus stop, rain mixed with tears, dripping down one after another. When you love someone, you use every fiber of your being. You grow possessive. When you suddenly hear about betrayal, no matter how good your temper normally is, jealousy spreads through your entire body. But I had seen far too many of these situations. Friends, relatives, parents, none of them had set good examples. When they talked about such things, they didn't even take them to heart. For a long time, I thought I was the odd one. Even Isabella, who knew me best, looked at my lifeless expression and couldn't understand. "Nova, the Ning family is valued at 300 billion. Martin is one of its elites. With that kind of status, having no women circling him? Unrealistic." Everyone told me to be at ease. After all, Martin was simply not faithful, but that flaw wasn't considered fatal. But I had to suppress my pain, unable to explode, because I had witnessed my mother's wretched state. A vase had shattered into pieces, and the ordeal twisted my gentle mother into something fragile and unhealthy. Later, she too kept seeking comfort outside, at first out of revenge, later out of addiction, with lust shadowing her eyes. She told me that when you can't resist, you can only go with the current. Then John appeared before me, holding an umbrella. He was tall, with fingers smooth and pale as jade. When he smiled, dimples showed at the corners of his cheeks. I lifted my head and told him to get lost, but he didn't seem to hear me, only tried to offer me the umbrella. With nowhere to vent my anger, I turned my sharpest, most venomous words on the stranger in front of me. But John merely looked at me with calm, gentle eyes. His gaze was deep and inclusive, like the sea. After a long moment, he lowered his head and typed a line on his phone. "Sorry, my hearing aid was sent for repair today. I can't hear what you're saying." His eyes curved softly, like a crescent moon. My words stuck in my throat, unable to go up or down. Shame washed over me. I had unleashed my rage on such a gentle boy. We met again in a university classroom. I had been invited as a successful entrepreneur to give a talk about life's highs and lows. During the ribbon cutting, I saw him. As an outstanding student, he took a photo with me, unexpectedly. When I received the printed copy from my assistant, I found myself staring at it, the boy's eyes soft, bright like stars, like the moon. Thinking of something, I asked my assistant to send him a hearing aid. Chapter 5. While I was still dazed, John, carrying his backpack, knocked lightly on the car window. My assistant was displeased, but I told her to keep quiet. The young man smiled and handed me the expensive hearing aid. "Hello, this is yours." He looked at me calmly, and in that moment, I suddenly realized he no longer remembered that I was the disheveled woman in the torrential rain that day. From then on, I began appearing around John frequently. At first, I had no intention of doing anything. Perhaps it was simply because there were so few pure human beings around me. Maybe when money reaches a certain amount, life becomes unbearably dull, and you start looking for entertainment. Around that time, Martin found his second decoding flower, a girl bold in love and hate, bright and fiery like Isabella. He was in the phase of savoring the novelty, almost intoxicated. I rarely saw him. He even slipped up a few times in front of me. I forced down my anger, quietly ate my meals, watched TV in silence. Martin stroked my hair. But Nova, the road we've walked together, it will always be different. Of course, I understood what that meant, and I knew he meant it sincerely. After all, the bond between us was different. I never doubted his genuine affection for me. We came from families of equal standing, both with pride in our bones. In the grasslands where no one else was around, I once kicked off my high heels and danced freely under the moonlight. He had held my shoes with that gentle patience. His eyes filled entirely with me. At our grand wedding, he said he would love me forever, but he never promised he would love only me forever. Chapter 6. John had a reserved personality, proper and disciplined. Before I even realized it, I discovered that he had fallen for me. Every time I spoke to him, the tips of his ears turned red. I couldn't help laughing and asked if he wanted to hear me play the piano. At that time, cherry blossoms were in full bloom. On the campus paths, students walked in small scattered groups. He and I walked a long stretch together. Behind the school was a hill beside the train tracks, where freight trains often passed. That day, under the slanted golden sunlight, the glow flowed gently across his cheek. Behind his ear was the roaring rumble of passing trains. John brushed my hand lightly, perhaps afraid I would be startled by the noise. He reached out and covered my ears. His fingertips were warm. At that very moment, the young man parted his lips and said something. I asked him what he said, but he didn't answer. Later, as I sat in the car on the way back to the Villa district, I pressed a hand to my forehead and suddenly smiled. In fact, not long after meeting John, I went to learn sign language and lip reading. If I hadn't learned wrong, what John said should have been, "I like you." The boy's affection was pure and earnest. Yet I felt despicable, because he didn't even know that I already had a husband. Someone like him, bright as the moon, would never understand the unspoken indulgences in powerful families. Chapter 7. For a long period of time, John knew I had trouble sleeping at night, so he would take a car to the villa and read me stories. He and I never crossed the line in any way. Sometimes I even felt a little self-destructive. I didn't erase Martin's trace from this house. Yet, interestingly, Martin's presence here was never very strong anyway. Perhaps he was too busy enjoying himself outside. And later, though we remained calm on the surface, inside, our hearts had already drifted apart. Just like tonight, John, as always, read me a fairy tale. In my childhood, I was raised mostly by nannies. My parents loved me, but the feeling wasn't deep. At the international school, classmates were competing with each other by age 8. That prematurely mature life meant I never had much exposure to stories. I blinked my eyes at John and asked, "So, the hunter wanted to kill Snow White, but later spared her. Do you think Snow White would forgive him?" He was used to answering one of my questions every day. He wasn't surprised at all. Without even a moment of thought, he replied, "She would." "Why?" I asked him back. If I were Snow White, I wouldn't forgive him. Someone who tries to kill me deserves to rot in hell forever, never seeing daylight. But someone who turns back from the wrong path, why wouldn't they deserve forgiveness? He asked this from half a meter away. I don't know what it was that I remembered in that instant. From birth until now, anything involving money rarely bothered me. People around me flattered, pleased, had their social circles. Some acted recklessly, without restraint, even indulging in dangerous thrills. I didn't participate, but because I saw it all the time, I grew used to it. I suddenly stood up, tilted my head, and lightly kissed John on the cheek. His fair skin flushed bright red in an instant. His eyes shimmered with a thin layer of moisture. He blinked rapidly with his big eyes. "No. Nova." A warm feeling filled my chest. "John, do you like me?" Even his neck turned scarlet. Chapter 8. I didn't expect Martin to rush home. At the time, I was wearing an oversized sweater, reading under the lamp. He first glanced around the room, and after confirming no one else was there, he relaxed and walked toward me, removing the watch from his wrist. His voice was gentle. "Sorry, Nova, I didn't tell you the truth. Actually, I was with Samuel today." Samuel was Isabella's husband. I didn't like him, because years ago, Isabella once had someone she truly liked, but in a family alliance, affection was the least important thing. Samuel had done something to that man. His ending was unfortunate. He left the country entirely. Before leaving, he stubbornly asked Samuel to treat Isabella well, saying that Isabella was the best girl in the world and deserved wholehearted love. That man never blamed Isabella, nor did he blame Samuel. He left only with the book Isabella had given him. Later, Isabella didn't have a good life. Samuel was arrogant and untamed. Their marriage existed partly for business, and partly so Samuel could teach Isabella a lesson. Samuel's humiliation never made Isabella cry, but I had seen her fragile moments. On the day that man left, she hid alone in her room, looking up at the sky. Her eyes were red. It seemed that, for men, character flaws were never a big deal, even though Martin knew I disliked Samuel. Outwardly he said nothing, but inwardly he probably thought Samuel hadn't done anything wrong. Many things, once habitual, become reasonable. I flipped to the next page of the fairy tale book, smiled slightly. "It's all right. Work requires it." Martin reached out as if to touch my forehead, but withdrew his hand because he was covered in cold air and the scent of perfume. "I'll shower first." His smile hadn't fully faded when he turned around, but the moment his eyes fell on the half-peeled orange on the cabinet, the warmth vanished instantly. A large shadow loomed over me. I lifted my head. Martin's expression was normal, emotion unreadable. "Nova, I remember, when I left earlier, there were no oranges in the house. Did you ask someone to buy them?" He knew I disliked oranges, so they never appeared here. So who had eaten something and casually left it there after he left? Still, he thoughtfully offered me an excuse, if I would just take it. Then on the surface, we could go back to the life we used to have. "Martin." I closed the book and looked straight at him. "When Isabella called me, you were listening beside her, weren't you? That's why you rushed back." To Isabella, my "I'm not untouched" either probably sounded like a joke. After all, she could never imagine someone like me, so proper, so disciplined, would learn to keep someone outside. But Martin knew I wasn't someone who made such jokes, so he had left the gathering, braving the wind and rain to return home. At my words, Martin's eyes darkened, ink black and heavy. Chapter 9. He casually threw the orange onto the floor, his very silhouette carrying a chill. I pressed my fingers against my temple, pulled the blanket toward me, and covered myself. Thunder rumbled. Lightning split the sky. The flashes made both our faces appear pale. After a long while, Martin finally turned around. He had already reined in all his emotions. Silently, he opened a cigarette case and asked if it was all right. He rarely touched such things. His self-control was extremely strong, and he usually held a certain disdain for them. Outside, rain poured relentlessly. I nodded. He lit one, placed it between his lips, and inhaled half of it in a single breath, as if trying to calm the suffocating anger in his chest. Then he asked me when I had gotten involved with someone outside. I answered truthfully. Martin's brows furrowed deeply. After a long silence, he took a deep breath. Nova, I thought you wouldn't. Why was Martin so certain I would never play the so-called high society games they played? For one reason only. I once saw my mother in the midst of an affair. People in a family always seem to be bound together by interests. Love was merely decoration, a luxury that could exist or not. But my mother had been different. She seemed to truly love my father. Many people mocked her for being sentimental, the last romantic of our circle. She was the one who made me believe love was sacred. Yet in the end, even she was dazzled and lost in this gaudy world. She had told me, loyalty is the least important thing, because we live inside the vortex. But the courage she once held stayed with me. I felt that someone, at the very least, ought to try doing what they believed was right. Martin understood me too well. He knew I loved him. I was different from everyone else. Nicely put, I was principled. Harshly put, I was naive. So the fact that I had someone outside hit him completely unprepared. Chapter 10. But Martin was still Martin. He placed his hand over mine, feeling the pulse beneath my skin. Nova, when can I meet that person too? Let me check if he's good enough for you. I pretended not to hear the probing in his words. Whether the person I kept truly liked me, or was just filling a moment of loneliness. If it were the latter, Martin might even feel relieved. He probably wanted me to say something on my own. After all, I had said long ago, we were childhood sweethearts, comrades, the two people who understood each other best in this world. Martin wasn't a fool. During those years when his family was in turmoil, I had stayed by his side with my whole heart. My love had been unquestionable, a sincerity unmatched by any of his later read confidants. I had said long ago, the path Martin and I walked together in our youth, no one else would ever walk it again. They saw him in his glory, saw the man who had succeeded. But once, long ago, he had also been a young boy whose ears flushed red from a single confession of love. Martin, you don't need to test me. Let's get a divorce. At last. I said it calmly. This sentence had taken me 5 years. Martin would probably never know, when the first decoding flower appeared, how wretched and heartbroken I had been. The girl had a smile like Isabella's. Martin indulged and spoiled her. There was a relaxation at the corner of his brows, one I had never seen before. Freshness was always deadly. Perhaps it was despair. I fell gravely ill, lying in a hospital bed, hooked to 4 fluids, listening to nurses gossip. They said Martin was so romantic. 8,888 roses, just to make some girl smile, as if they had forgotten the existence of Martin's wife. As if, in these scandals, the newcomer was always the one to pity. At that time, Martin was intoxicated. A far cry from the later calm. He never noticed my abnormalities. I had always been proud, never allowing myself to show weakness. But that night, my tears soaked the blanket. I felt suffocated, in pain, in despair. For a moment, I even thought I would die. So I called Martin. A girl answered his phone. She told me Martin was in the shower. She asked what Mrs. Ning wanted. Perhaps the pain had worn me thin. My tone was terrible. I ordered her to hand the phone to Martin Ning. The girl didn't listen. She simply cried. Martin coaxed her gently, asking whose call it was. She told him the truth. Martin took the phone after a long silence. At that moment, I still had a faint, pathetic hope. Love is such a torment. I could feel my heart being lifted up high. But all he said was, Nova, don't be like Isabella. At that time, Isabella and Samuel were making a scene. It displeased Samuel greatly. Isabella couldn't touch Samuel himself, so she targeted the girls around him. Anyone who offended Samuel then had bad luck. Everyone in our circle knew Samuel had lost face completely. Instantly, I felt as if someone had crushed my heart and tossed it from a high building, shattering it into pieces. That night, the tears that reached my lips were bitter, perhaps realizing his words were too harsh. Martin softened his voice. Nova, are you afraid of the dark? The girl beside him giggled softly. Whimpering coquettishly, I shoved the phone beneath my pillow and didn't say another word. For the first time, I truly understood that Martin was a good childhood companion, a competent decision-maker, but I had made a fatal mistake with the shallow feelings between us. I had tried to resist the family's reputation, the unspoken rules everyone accepted. That night, my suffering didn't last long. A nurse soon noticed something was wrong. After emergency treatment, I barely kept my life. Over the next few days, Martin sent messages and called, saying he had been drunk that night and had taken his frustration out on me because Samuel had complained the day before. At the time, I looked down at the 4 line on the back of my hand, leaned into the soft pillow, watching leaves drift slowly outside the window. Martin, I am Nova Sue, the eldest daughter of the Sue family. I know our bond isn't just between you and me. It's billions in cooperation. A century of ties. I answered gently. Martin was silent. He took a deep breath. Nova, you seem to have grown up. I didn't say anything more. Chapter 11. I'm really not what anyone would call a smart person. It took me 5 whole years to completely pull Martin out of my heart, even though I never again called because of the women around him. When I was alone at night, my heart still twisted in agony. Sleepless nights, insomnia, suspicion, anger, despair. Only after all that was I able to look at Martin calmly now. Even with a faint smile, let's get a divorce. Martin's expression was somewhat disbelieving. Time seemed to freeze in that instant. His handsome face even warped slightly, losing its usual softness. I don't want anything. I slowly added that sentence. Impossible. Martin snapped back instantly, cutting me off in agitation. Nova, do you even know how much I'm worth now? Being Martin's wife came with plenty of privileges. He had already become capital itself. We exchanged a hurried glance. He looked as though my indifference had wounded him. Then he half knelt beside me. Nova, we don't have to end up like this. Love is such a cold, fragile thing. Fame and fortune all stand before it. But Martin already possessed all of that. So whatever shallow affection he still had suddenly felt like it carried a bit of weight. Martin, we should end this decently. We're both people who care about dignity. I decisively tugged down my sweater, revealing my chest. There was a kiss mark. Martin narrowed his eyes dangerously. Who is it? Who's that man? Tonight my confession must have startled John. That cool, aloof young man kissed with no technique at all. When he kissed down toward my chest, he suddenly scrambled to his feet, saying we should wait until after marriage. Then he hurried to heat some milk for me, told me to sleep well, and left the house. I didn't answer Martin, but he only grew more deranged. Nova, why did you fall for someone? Between us, how could there be a third person? Who allowed you to actually feel something? Martin, a person shouldn't be too greedy. You can't have everything. His eyes were bloodshot, veins bulging on his neck, and he smashed everything around him he could get his hands on. Nova, I wasn't frightened by his actions. I simply stepped back 2 steps. Martin, I have the Sue family behind me. You can't touch me, so stop trying to threaten me. Chapter 12. I had thought that after hearing all this, he would at least consider our years-long agreement and his reputation, but with reddened eyes, he simply asked me, why? I couldn't tell him the reason. The things I never voiced back when I loved him with raw sincerity, those requests, were even more impossible to say now. So I answered calmly, trying to make it clear with the smoothest social tact. Even if we divorced, we were still childhood sweethearts. I would not stand opposite him in his work. Martin, I've never doubted your abilities, and I've never had any ulterior motive to use retreat to advance strategies to control you. I just gave up all these halos. I think we were never truly suited for each other. My tone was soft, every word sincere. I'm asking why you fell for someone else. He couldn't care less about business or the glory behind him. I was slightly shocked. In my eyes, affection, liking someone, was the least important thing in the mind of someone like Martin. If I weren't Nova, he would never have married me. But the year we got married, neither of us knew whether Martin would actually seize the position he wanted. Maybe from the very beginning, our relationship had been unequal. Nova, his voice softened, and he leaned closer, desperate to prove something. Where did I not do well enough? Seeing him like this made me momentarily dazed. But a moment later, the malice inside me swelled. Perhaps Martin did care about me, even if only a little. So I curved my lips and asked, "Martin, have you ever, at any point, regretted not having a child? After all, if we had a bond between us, maybe in your eyes I wouldn't be able to leave so decisively." Martin stared at me, his heartbeat pounding wildly. He suddenly wanted to stop me from speaking, but the violent trembling in his chest left him unable to open his mouth. He could only wait silently for me to finish. But I wanted him to face the cruelty I once endured. I wanted him to know there was absolutely no possibility left between us. So I continued, "I once had a child." A pleading look rose in his eyes, begging me not to continue. I ignored it. It was gone. "I ended the pregnancy when you gained your second understanding blossom. Martin, what stands between us isn't someone I love or someone you love. It's the fact that all these years, I've been cutting ties bit by bit. I've always known our ending. I wouldn't even allow a child to try to change a conclusion that was already set. Back then, Isabella didn't have the courage to risk everything and leave the cage her family built for her. But I did." Chapter 13. From that day on, Martin seemed like a different person. Isabella clicked her tongue. "Did you feed Martin some kind of love potion soup? I heard he lost his temper and cut off people around him. Have Samuel help me talk to him. The divorce isn't a bluff." I answered lazily. Isabella stayed silent for a long moment. "You're serious? Will the Sue family agree? The current one in power is an illegitimate son. He's very wary of my marriage with Martin." I told her. Isabella said nothing more, only murmured that I was luckier than she was. Martin's attempts to win me back were nothing innovative. He brought me back to the old estate and pointed at the big tree, laughing as he said, "Nova, do you remember how you climbed this tree? And I stood underneath with my arms open, ready to catch you?" I cooperatively nodded. "Yes, right after I said I was the eldest daughter of the Sue family." He froze. At that time, Martin's standing in the Ning family wasn't stable. His mother's family had run into enormous trouble. And unfortunately, Martin's father refused to step in to help. So after I revealed my background, Martin inexplicably grew closer to me. Thinking back, he must have been trying to draw the Sue family to his side. Chapter 14. Later, I heard that Martin had tracked down the doctor who performed my abortion. The entire hospital was intimidated by his presence. The doctor took a long time before recalling how pale I had been that day. According to the doctor's account, I hadn't been firmly determined to end the pregnancy at first. When I received the news that I was pregnant, my fingers intertwined nervously for a moment. The doctor asked whether my husband knew about it. I didn't know what I suddenly remembered, but I softly said I wanted to terminate the pregnancy. They said Martin's expression had turned extremely dark. He grabbed the doctor's hand and demanded to know why I had changed my mind. The doctor knew who Martin was and didn't dare to make anything up, yet truly couldn't remember. It was a timid nurse who finally stepped forward and told him that the headline news that day was a video of Martin backing up Vicky. The girl's shy, delicate manner was obvious. Every major investor had to consider Martin's reputation and wouldn't dare lay a hand on her. With Martin's status, that video could only have been released with his permission. He wanted the world to know Vicky was under his protection. Maybe Martin had only wanted to keep a clean, innocent girl by his side, but in that instant, I made my decision. When I entered the operating room, the lights above were blinding. I didn't feel pain, only dizziness, so bright that it made my eyes water. Later, Martin called me. His voice was strained. "Nova, I truly believe that in our marriage, I have never been distracted." "That's not what I want," I replied. "I want to experience the kind of love my mother once spoke of." Chapter 15. I didn't know whether Martin had calmed down or not, but I guess he would probably scoff at the things I'd said, sentimental nonsense. Until John called me. His youthful voice on the other end was gentle. "Miss Sue, I heard that you recommended me for studying abroad." There was a hint of joy in his tone. It must have been a great opportunity. Later I learned that Martin had funded the program and selected several candidates, but I knew very well who the real target was. "You want to see the world?" I asked John. "Not a bad idea. Just that, in the future, I probably won't hear you telling me stories anymore." After all, I knew the overseas program lasted 8 years, far too long, and the agreement required that he could not return midway, or he would owe a staggering penalty. I never believed in everlasting love or eternity, perhaps because I'd never truly had them. I only believed in decadence, fleeting pleasures, and how easily hearts change. Martin asked to meet me. I refused. Instead, I sat alone on a bench in the plaza, feeding pigeons. But he still found me. The wind was strong outside, and he instinctively wrapped a scarf around my neck. Martin, I asked, besides using temptation and benefits, do you have no other method of manipulating people's hearts? In this age of law, it's not like I'd resort to force. He replied calmly, Nova, there's nothing in this world worth your stubbornness. After all the circling around, you and I are still the most suitable. For a moment, I suddenly felt I couldn't understand him. What was this supposed to be? Crocodile tears? Another demonstration that money tests human nature, and then tells you many things are insignificant? Martin, the illegitimate sons in the Ning family, you suppressed them, not killed them. If I teamed up with them to cause you trouble, you wouldn't be too pleased, right? I removed the scarf and placed it in his hand. Martin stared into my indifferent eyes. When you stand on the moral high ground and bring trouble to others, do you ever wonder what happens when someone troubles you in return? Will you wake up, regret, or just feel disgusted? I scattered the corn in my hand onto the ground. Nova, you love me. You'll never love someone else the way you love me. Why can't we just start over? Martin asked. What is John? If not for you, I wouldn't even bother looking at him. And he thinks he's worthy of forcing his way between us? His voice grew increasingly agitated. I hadn't seen him like this in years. He had always seemed so composed, so in control. If that's the case, then why did you use those gentle, attentive women to disgust me? I smiled lightly. Those women, do they even deserve to be compared to me? Yet you lifted them up, placed them in positions pretending to rival me. Martin, do you really think you deserve that? My eyes curved slightly. Martin's face turned ashen. I thought I might finally be close to being free. Chapter 16. When I received John's call, I was at the airport. My secretary had told me he was on this flight. I admitted to myself that my feelings for John weren't deep enough to risk everything for him, but after he had accompanied me for so long, I should at least see him off. Yet I didn't see him anywhere. When I answered his call, his youthful voice rambled softly through the receiver. Miss Sue, I got the new hearing aid you sent. I was selfish, for a moment. I thought it was a gift from my girlfriend, even though it's expensive. I don't want to send it back. Is that okay? In my eyes, John had always been shy, earnest, and hardworking. He had a glow about him, something I didn't have. Sorry, I replied. I'm not planning on doing a long-distance relationship. Across the sea of travelers, I lifted my head. John was standing just 3 meters away, raising his hand to wave at me. He hadn't left the country. He hadn't accepted Martin's offer. The opportunity was incredibly rare, he knew that. And even if he stayed with me, I could never promise him such favorable conditions. John wore an off-white sweater, and only then did I realize the sweater he gave me was the matching pair, couple style. His clear brows and bright eyes softened as he walked toward me. Just like that rainy day when I glared coldly at him while he simply smiled and asked if I needed anything. I didn't ask him why he didn't leave. He didn't ask how I knew he was supposed to be on today's flight. He walked beside me, gently held my hand, and led me through the crowd. Chapter 17. The Ning family would never allow Martin Ning to be held back by sentimental matters for too long. The day we signed the divorce agreement, Martin looked unwell. The terms he gave me were generous, everything except the company shares. Money was something I already had plenty of. But who ever complains about having too much? I always thought we'd last forever, he said, propping his chin in his hand as he gazed at me with lingering affection. But the world has never been about what you or I imagined. Martin, goodbye. I stood and smiled at him. When we were young, every time he walked me home, I also smiled at him like this and said goodbye, only to see him again the next day. But this time, it was truly goodbye. We both knew it. Martin didn't speak, just like the habit he had carried for years. He watched me walk away. That was as far as we could ever go. He had his life principles and his business empire, and his greatest kindness to me was the period when he tried, sincerely and wholeheartedly, to keep me John was waiting for me downstairs. His youthful features carried a quiet joy as he asked softly, "Did you finish everything with him?" I looked him over from head to toe, then nodded. He exhaled in relief, then gathered his courage to gently take my hand. His eyes seemed to be asking, "Is this okay?" It had been so long since I'd been in a love this pure. My heart trembled, rare, unexpected. So I smiled and said, "John, since you came to tell me a story today, don't leave again, okay?" John walked ahead of me. At my words, the tips of his ears turned a deep red. Just when I thought he wouldn't answer, he gave a tiny, quiet nod. The sunlight was warm, and everything, as always, must begin anew. Extra, John. The first time I saw Nova, she was standing in the rain, her eyes red, tears falling in big drops. Even though she was cursing me, I could see every word. My lip-reading skills were excellent. But in that moment, for some reason, all I could focus on was the soft pink of her lips opening and closing. So I pretended to be weak and told her I wasn't wearing my hearing aid. As expected, she went silent instantly, regret filling her eyes. Right then, I understood this person before me had a soft heart, but she had no interest in me. At school, they called me a top scholar, a prodigy. Plenty of people pursued me. I didn't care until I met Nova. While she spoke confidently on stage, all I could think about was the way her eyes had filled with tears that day. Someone teased me, asking if I had fallen for her, then warned me not to have wicked thoughts about a married woman. Yes, I knew very early on that Nova was married. She probably thought she hid it well, but she rarely wore her ring. Yet my love for Nova came fierce and violent. I didn't know love could strip a person of all rationality. After showing vulnerability again and again, Nova became increasingly indulgent toward me. She even allowed me to go to her home and read her stories. I searched for stories full of beauty and kindness, but countless times, I wanted to claim her, to mark her, but I couldn't. I could only stare at her greedily when she wasn't looking. I deliberately left small traces, hoping Nova's husband would notice, but he was far too stupid. Until the day Nova didn't want to play anymore. I knew she was finally responding to my love. Later, her husband clung to her relentlessly, even tried to tempt me with promises of a brilliant future, telling me that once I rose to the top, I could have all the women I wanted. It was indeed a beautiful offer. But Martin didn't know. I never cared about that. I am not as gentle and harmless as I appear. My obsession with Nova kept me awake for countless nights. But Nova liked my warm, gentle facade. She liked the purity that didn't exist in their circle. So I could only pretend to be docile and harmless, just so her gaze would stay on me a little longer. Maybe Nova doesn't love me deeply, but it's fine. As long as she turns around and looks at me, I can cling to her like a snake, like a dog, until death. On the day of their divorce, Martin watched our backs in utter defeat. Nova's invitation made my chest tremble. The joy was so intense I almost couldn't hide my fangs. My Rose, I will love you forever.